an original story narrated exclusively for love written in silence. The duet for violin and soprano reached its final resolution, and in Box 12 at Covent Garden, Julian Greybourne, Duke of Wyndham, felt his chest tighten in a way it had not since the morning he found his brother's body 18 months before. The music, grief braided with hope, a melody that knew exactly where sorrow wanted to go, cracked something he had kept locked behind committee meetings and parliamentary votes, and his grandmother's careful management of his return to society. During the interval, the foyer, marble floors, candlelight on gilded mirrors, the rustle of silk, and the low hum of polite conversation. 3 seconds of eye contact with a woman whose face carried the music's exact emotional register. Ownership, wonder, the expression of someone hearing their own thought, spoken back by strangers. His sleeve brushed her arm as the crowd shifted. A glove slipped from her hand to the marble. She was already gone. He picked it up, kid leather, fine but old, worn at the fingertips where someone gripped a pen. A faint stain of ink on the inside seam, and felt the warmth of her hand still clinging to the fabric. The evening had begun as every evening had begun for 18 months, with Julian's grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Wyndham, placing her gloved hand on his arm and guiding him through the motions of a life he no longer inhabited. The opera was her idea. Covent Garden, a return to society. She had chosen his coat, his gloves, the box, the hour of arrival. She had even chosen the opera itself. A new program, she said, something fresh, nothing that would remind him of Nathaniel. She had been wrong. The duet began halfway through the first act, violin and soprano. The violin's opening phrase rose like a question, asked by someone who already knew the answer would hurt. The soprano answered with a resolution so precise, so inevitable, that Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He gripped the armrest of his seat. The melody was Nate's, not literally, not a piece he had ever heard his brother play. But the emotional architecture was unmistakable, joy expressed through minor keys, grief that resolved instead of enduring. A man trying not to cry, played on strings. His grandmother noticed. She always noticed. Her hand found his arm, her fingers pressing lightly through the fabric of his coat. A silent instruction. Compose yourself. He did not compose himself. He leaned forward. He listened. And for the first time since the morning, he had arrived at Nate's rooms to find the violin, still on the bed, and the note on the music stand. Jules, come hear me play on Thursday. I've written something. Julian felt something other than the locked door of his own grief. The duet ended. The audience applauded. Julian sat motionless, his hands flat on his knees, his breath shallow. Are you unwell? His grandmother asked quietly. No, he said. I am not unwell. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We will take the interval in the foyer. You need air. In the gallery, the cheapest seats, 3 rows from the back, Elise Harmon leaned forward, her lips moving silently with the soprano's line. She had written those notes at 2 in the morning, seated at the upright piano in her rooms, above the printer's shop, her hands shaking with cold and exhaustion, and the certainty that the melody in her father's notebook, the one marked only with the initials, and wanted exactly this resolution. A 7th chord that refused to settle, a phrase that ended mid-breath, and she had heard where it needed to go. She had wept while writing it, not because the music was sad, but because it was right. The soprano held the final note. The violin descended. The resolution arrived. Elise closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. 700 people in the auditorium, and not one of them knew her name. The program read, Duet for Violin and Soprano, composed by S. Harmon, Samuel Harmon, her father, dead 3 years. She had sold the piece to the opera company for £8 under his initials, because the director would not have opened an envelope addressed from a woman, and because her father's work had always been invisible, and because Elise had learned early that the music did not need her name on it. It only needed to exist. The applause began. Elise stood with the rest of the gallery, her hands pressed together, her throat tight. She had heard the duet in rehearsal, Mr. Ferry. The Italian conductor had allowed her to sit in the wings, while the orchestra ran through it. But this was different. This was the full house, the chandeliers lit, the audience dressed in silks and dark wool and jewels that caught the light, the world she would never enter, hearing the music she had written in a room, so cold she could see her breath. She had worn her one good dress tonight, her mother's gloves. She wanted to be here, in this building, when they played it. During the interval, she descended. The foyer was a river of silk and candlelight. Elise stood near the marble balustrade, her back to the wall, watching the crowd move past her. She did not belong here. She knew it. The women in their pearl-trimmed gowns knew it. The men in their dark coats and polished boots knew it. But the music had been hers, and she wanted to stand in the same air as the people who had heard it. A group swept past, older woman, younger man, 2 attendants trailing behind. The man was tall, dark-haired, perhaps 30, handsome in the way dukes and earls were handsome, well-fed, well-dressed, well-bred. He moved through the crowd without looking at it, his face carrying the expression of someone performing a duty he no longer believed in. Elise stepped aside to let them pass. His sleeve brushed her arm. For 3 seconds, their eyes met. She saw him see her, not the dress, not the gloves, but the expression on her face, the one she had not managed to hide. Ownership. Wonder. The look of someone who had just heard their own thought, spoken back by 700 strangers. The crowd shifted. Someone jostled her from behind. Her hand opened reflexively. The glove slipped from her fingers and fell to the marble floor. By the time she looked down, the crowd had carried her forward. By the time she turned back, the man and his party were gone. She did not go back for the glove. It was an old glove, worn thin at the seams, ink-stained on the inside, where her pen hand rested. She had another pair at home. She returned to the gallery and sat through the second act with her hands folded in her lap, unloved, listening to the rest of the program, and thinking about the duet and the way the soprano had held the final note exactly as long as Elise had imagined it. Julian bent and picked up the glove before his grandmother could speak. "Leave it with the attendant," she said. "Someone will claim it." He turned the glove over in his hand. Kid leather. Fine quality but old, softened by years of wear rather than newness. The fingertips were slightly flattened, where someone had gripped a pen. On the inside seam, near the base of the thumb, a faint smudge of black ink. The glove was still warm. "Julian," his grandmother said. He put the glove in his coat pocket. "The attendant will. I will return it myself," he said. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "As you wish." They returned to the box. Julian sat through the second act without hearing a single note. His hand remained in his coat pocket, his fingers curled around the glove, feeling the warmth fade slowly into the cool air of the theater. The next morning, Julian sat in his study with the glove on the desk in front of him, and a letter half-written to an inquiry agent, whose services he had never required before. The letter was absurd. He knew it was absurd, but he could not stop his hand from writing. "I am seeking the owner of a glove left at Covent Garden on the evening of the 14th. The glove is kid leather, well worn, with ink staining on the interior seam. I believe the woman who wore it may have been seated in the gallery. I require her name and direction." He signed the letter, sealed it, sent it with a footman before he could reconsider. The agent's reply arrived 3 days later. "Your Grace, the glove was made by Clarkson & Sons, a firm that closed its doors 8 years ago. I have traced the original purchase to the estate sale of Mrs. Lydia Harmon, widow of Samuel Harmon, music copyist at Covent Garden. Mrs. Harmon died 3 years past. The glove was likely sold with the household effects. I have located a Miss Elise Harmon, daughter of the deceased, residing at an address in Cheapside. I enclose the particulars below." Julian read the letter twice. Then he reached for his coat. Cheapside was not a neighborhood Julian had entered in 10 years. The streets were narrow, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and ink, and the faint sour tang of the Thames carried on the wind. He found the address the agent had provided. A printer's shop on a corner, its windows clouded with grime. The sign above the door reading Aldrich and Co. Fine Printing. A narrow door beside the shop led to the upper floors. Julian climbed 2 flights of stairs that smelled of damp wood and old paper. At the top, a single door, slightly ajar. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. From inside, a voice, female, distracted, irritated, called, "It is open. Leave the proofs on the table." Julian pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small. 2 windows, both facing the street. A table in the center, stained black with ink. Scores scattered across every surface, on the table, on the chair, on the floor, pinned to the walls. An upright piano against the far wall, its lid open, the keys yellowed with age. A cat asleep on a stack of Handel transcriptions. At the table, bent over a sheet of manuscript paper, sat a woman in a plain gray dress, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, her hair pinned back carelessly. Her right hand held a pen. Her left hand was ink-stained to the wrist. She did not look up. "The Rossini is not finished," she said. "If Ferry sent you to hurry me, you may tell him I will have it by Thursday." And not a moment sooner. Julian cleared his throat. She looked up. Her eyes widened. The pen stilled in her hand. "You," she said, "Miss Harmon." She set the pen down slowly. "You are not from the theater." "No, then who are you?" "Julian Greybourne," he said. "Duke of Wyndham." She stared at him. Then she stood, wiping her hands on a cloth that only spread the ink further. "What are you doing in my rooms?" He reached into his coat and withdrew the glove. "I believe this is yours." She looked at the glove, then at him, then back at the glove. "You came here to return a glove." "Yes, you are a duke." "Yes, and you climbed 2 flights of stairs in Cheapside to return a glove." "I lost 3 days ago, at the opera." "Yes." She crossed the room and took the glove from his hand, studied it, turned it over. "I have another pair. I am aware." Then why she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. "You were at the opera." "Box 12. I was." "You heard the duet." "I did." She set the glove on the table beside the manuscript paper. "What do you want, Your Grace?" Julian had prepared an answer. He had rehearsed it on the walk from his townhouse to Cheapside. But standing in this room, ink-stained, cramped, filled with music and the smell of coal smoke and the faint warmth of the cat asleep on the handle, he found he could not deliver the polite fiction he had planned. "My brother," he said, "left unfinished musical compositions when he died. I cannot read them. I do not know what they mean. I was told you are a copyist." "I am. I would like to engage your services." She studied him for a long moment. "Your brother was a musician. He played violin. What was his name?" "Nathaniel Greybourne." Her face went still. She turned back to the table, her hand resting on the edge of the manuscript paper. "Nathaniel Greybourne," she repeated softly. "Did you know him?" No, she picked up the pen again, her fingers curling around it tightly. "But my father did." Elise did not invite the Duke of Wyndham to sit. She did not offer tea. She stood at the table with her back to him and stared at the unfinished Rossini transcription without seeing it. Nathaniel Greybourne. She had found the name in her father's notebooks 6 months after his death. 3 compositions, unfinished, unsigned, marked only with the initials and in brief notes in her father's handwriting. Thursday night. N.S. violin speaks like a man trying not to cry. And later, and says he will finish this when his brother comes to hear him play. I think he is waiting for something that will not arrive. Elise had not known who N was. She had not cared. The music had been enough. She had taken the best of the 3, a duet for violin and soprano, and completed it. She had sold it to the opera company, under her father's initials, because it was the only way the music would reach the stage. And now the brother, the one Nathaniel had been waiting for, stood in her rooms, holding a glove he had spent 3 days searching for, asking her to interpret music he had never bothered to hear while his brother lived. She turned to face him. "Your brother invited you to hear him play," she said. Julian's expression did not change. "How do you know that?" "My father's notebooks. He wrote down everything. Every rehearsal. Every conversation." Nathaniel told him he had written something and invited his brother to come on Thursday nights. "You never came." "No," Julian said quietly. "I did not." "Why?" "I had other obligations. Committee meetings," Elise said. The words came out sharp, bitter. "Parliamentary votes. Duties." Julian's jaw tightened. "Yes. And now you want me to help you understand what you ignored while he was alive." The quiet that followed held weight, like the pause between a question and its unwelcome answer. "Yes," Julian said finally. Elise picked up the glove from the table, turned it over in her hands. The ink stain on the seam, the worn fingertips, the warmth long since faded. She should refuse. She should tell this duke, this man who had let his brother die waiting, to leave her rooms and take his guilt with him. But the music, the unfinished compositions in her father's notebooks, the melodies that ended mid-phrase, the harmonies that wanted resolution, the violin lines that spoke like a man trying not to cry. Unfinished music was unbearable. "I will look at the scores," she said, "but I will not flatter your grief. If the music says your brother was lonely, I will tell you. If it says he was waiting for you, I will tell you that too." Julian met her eyes. "I would expect nothing less." 2 days later, Julian brought Elise to Nathaniel's rooms. The Wyndham townhouse occupied a corner in Mayfair. The entrance hall was marble and gilt and cold morning light. A butler took Elisa's coat without comment, though his eyes lingered on the ink stains at her cuffs. Julian led her up 2 flights of stairs to a corridor, lined with portraits of men in dark coats and women in pearls. At the end of the corridor, a door. Julian stopped in front of it. His hand rested on the handle, but did not turn it. "I have not entered this room since the funeral," he said. Elise said nothing. He opened the door. The room was exactly as Nathaniel had left it. The bed unmade, the wardrobe half open, scores scattered across the desk, the floor, the windowsill, and on the bed, resting on the rumpled blankets, a violin. Elise crossed the room and picked it up. The wood was warm, as though someone had been playing it moments before. She turned it over in her hands. The varnish was worn near the chin rest. The strings were old, but still taut. On the back of the neck, carved in small, careful letters, N.G. She looked at Julian. "You left his violin on the bed. I did not know what else to do with it. You could have played it. I do not play. You could have learned." Julian's face was unreadable. "I could have done many things." Elise set the violin down gently and turned to the desk. The scores were scattered, overlapping, some half-finished, some marked with notes in Nathaniel's handwriting. She recognized the script immediately, the same script from her father's notebooks. Neat, precise, the musical notation so careful, it looked like lace. She picked up the first score. Read the opening bars. Set it down. Picked up the second. Stopped. "This," she said. Julian stepped closer. "What is it?" "This is the duet. The one they performed at Covent Garden." She turned the page. The melody ended halfway through the second movement. No resolution. Just a 7th chord hanging in the air, waiting. "He did not finish it," Julian said. "No," Elise said. "I did." Julian went very still. "You?" "Yes. You completed my brother's composition. I found it in my father's notebooks. Nathaniel must have shown it to him. My father copied it. After he died, I found it among his things. The melody was—" She stopped. Her hands were trembling. It was unbearable, leaving it unfinished. I could hear where it wanted to go. Julian crossed the room and stood behind her chair. His hands came down on her shoulders, pressing firmly, grounding her. The weight was solid, deliberate. She leaned back into the pressure. "Play it," he said. "What?" "The violin. Play the opening bars." "I am not a violinist." "You are a musician." She looked up at him. His face was shadowed, unreadable. But his hands remained on her shoulders, steady. She picked up the violin, tucked it under her chin, drew the bow across the strings. The sound filled the room, clear, plaintive, a question asked by someone who already knew the answer would hurt. She played the opening phrase, the one Nathaniel had written, the one that ended on the unresolved 7th, and then she played the resolution, the one she had written at 2 in the morning in her cold rooms above the printer's shop. The sound changed. The grief did not disappear, but it found a place to rest. The melody descended. The harmony settled. The violin spoke like a man who had finally stopped trying not to cry. When she finished, Julian's hands were still on her shoulders. His thumbs traced the line of her collarbones through the fabric of her dress. "That is what he sounded like," Julian said quietly. "That is exactly what he sounded like." Elise set the violin down. Her hands were shaking again. She turned in the chair to look at him. "You never heard him play?" "No, you had 18 months. He was 3 miles away, and you never came." "I know." "Then do not tell me now that you recognize his voice. You do not have the right." Julian's hands fell away from her shoulders. He stepped back. "You are correct," he said. "I do not." Elise stood. She crossed to the desk and began sorting through the scores, her hands moving quickly, precisely, organizing the chaos into stacks, finished pieces, unfinished pieces, fragments. At the bottom of the pile, a letter. She picked it up. The handwriting was not Nathaniel's. It was formal, legal. The letterhead read, "Calloway and Sons, Solicitors." She read the first line, stopped. "Read it again." "Your Grace," she said. Julian turned. She held up the letter. "Did you know your brother left a will?" Julian took the letter from her hands. "Read it once, then again." "Dear Mr. Greyborn, further to our conversation of the 16th, I have prepared the documents, establishing a trust in the sum of £300 per annum for the continuation of your musical work, to be administered jointly by yourself and Mr. Samuel Harmon, music copyist. Please sign and return the enclosed forms at your earliest convenience. Yours faithfully, J. Calloway. The letter was dated 6 weeks before Nathaniel's death. Julian turned the page. The will itself was unsigned. The trust had never been executed. He left money for your father, Julian said. For their work, Elise corrected. My father and your brother, together. Your father is dead. Yes, the work is yours now. Elise met his eyes. Is it? Julian looked down at the unsigned will in his hands. £300 per annum. Enough to live on. Enough to compose without copying scores 16 hours a day. Enough to walk through the front door of Covent Garden carrying music with her own name on it. Your brother left this money for the continuation of their musical work, Elise said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched at her sides. Will you execute it, or will you mourn a man you have invented? Julian said nothing. Elise picked up her coat from the chair where she had left it. When you have decided what your brother's life was worth to you, you may send word. Until then, I have copying to finish. She walked out of the room. Julian stood alone in Nathaniel's untouched space, the unsigned will in his hands, the violin on the bed, and the question hanging in the air like an unresolved chord. That evening, Julian sat in his study with the will on the desk in front of him, and his grandmother's voice in his head. Nathaniel was a good boy who died too young. He had heard her say it 100 times, at the funeral, at the memorial service, at the dinners where well-meaning friends offered condolences, and his grandmother nodded gracefully and said, yes, he was a good boy. We miss him terribly. A good boy. Not a man who played violin in rented rooms with a copyist and a handful of musicians Julian had never met. Not a man who wrote compositions that spoke like someone trying not to cry. Not a man who managed his own finances and left money to a working-class friend because he trusted that friend more than his own family. A good boy who died too young. Julian set the will down, picked up a pen, put it down again. The door to the study opened. His grandmother entered without knocking. You have been in Nathaniel's rooms, she said. Yes, the housekeeper told me. She said you brought a woman. I did. Who is she? A music copyist, Elise Harmon. Her father knew Nate. His grandmother's expression did not change, but Julian saw the slight tightening around her eyes. Why did you bring her to Nathaniel's rooms? She is helping me interpret his compositions. Nathaniel's compositions are private. They are family. They were meant to be heard, Julian said. One of them was performed at Covent Garden 3 days ago. His grandmother went very still. What are you talking about? Julian told her. The duet, the unfinished melody, Elise's completion, the program that read S. Harmon. When he finished, his grandmother sat down slowly in the chair across from his desk. This woman, she said carefully, completed Nathaniel's work and sold it under her father's name. Yes, without permission. The work was unfinished. It was unbearable to leave it that way. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. His grandmother leaned forward. Julian, you are chasing a ghost wearing a woman's glove. This is not love. This is grief looking for a body. Julian looked at her. You may be right. Then stop. I cannot. Why? Because she finished Nate's music. And I want to know what else he left unfinished. His grandmother stood. If you pursue this, you will regret it. The woman is a copyist. She lives above a printer's shop. She has no family, no standing. No, she has Nate's music, Julian said. That is enough. His grandmother studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Very well. But do not say I did not warn you. She left. Julian sat alone in the study. He picked up the pen, dipped it in ink, signed his name at the bottom of a letter to the solicitor. Proceed with the trust, as outlined in my brother's will. Execute it in full. The beneficiary is Miss Elise Harmon, daughter of Samuel Harmon, residing at the address enclosed. He sealed the letter, sent it with a footman. Then he sat back in his chair and waited for the cost to arrive. The cost arrived 2 days later in the form of Lady Constance Ashby, Julian's maternal aunt, who swept into his study without invitation and placed a letter on his desk. Read it, she said. Julian picked up the letter. It was addressed to the director of Covent Garden Opera Company. The handwriting was his aunt's. Dear Sir, I write to inform you that Mr. Samuel Harmon, whose name appears on recent program submissions, died 3 years past. Any compositions submitted under the initial CES since that time are fraudulent. I trust you will investigate this matter with the appropriate urgency. Julian set the letter down. You sent this. I did. Why? Because you are destroying yourself over a woman who does not exist. The glove, the music, the copyist's daughter. You are not in love, Julian. You are grieving. And you are using this woman as a vessel for emotions you cannot direct. At the brother you failed, Julian stood. You do not know what I feel. I know what I see. A man who has not entered his brother's rooms in 18 months, suddenly spending every afternoon there with a stranger. A man who ignored Nathaniel's invitations, while he lived now searching London for people who knew him. That is not love. That is guilt. Perhaps it is both. Constance's expression softened slightly. Julian, I am trying to protect you. By destroying her livelihood. By severing a connection that will only deepen your grief. When the opera company investigates, they will discover the truth. The woman will be dismissed. You will be free to mourn properly. Julian looked down at the letter. You have already sent this. Yes. Then the damage is done. The damage was done the moment you climbed those stairs in Cheapside. Constance left. Julian sat down slowly. He picked up the letter. Read it again. Then he reached for his coat. Elise learned of the cancellation from a stagehand in the alley behind Covent Garden. Performance is off, the man said, carrying a crate of costumes toward the storage entrance. Director's orders. The soprano's been sent home. Elise stopped walking. What do you mean off? Cancelled. The whole evening. Someone sent a letter saying the composer's dead. Director's investigating. The crate disappeared through the door. The stagehand followed. Elise stood in the alley, her hands clenched at her sides, staring at the stage door 10 feet away. Behind that door, the piano, the empty stage, the auditorium, where 700 people were going to hear her second composition, under her father's initials. Her second composition, the one she had written in the weeks after Nathaniel's duet, was performed. The one that had taken her 4 months. The one that was hers, not her father's, not Nathaniel's, but hers. Gone. She did not go to Julian. She did not send word. She did not wait for permission. She walked to the stage door, pushed it open, crossed the darkened wings. The stage was unlit. The auditorium was empty, except for a few stagehands clearing the orchestra pit and Mr. Ferry, the conductor, standing near the piano with his coat half on, frozen mid-motion. Elise crossed the stage, sat down at the piano, placed her hands on the keys. Ferry turned. Miss Harmon, you should not be here. Neither should you. The performance has been cancelled. I know. Then why she began to play. Not the cancelled piece. The duet. Nathaniel's unfinished melody, resolved by her hand. She played the soprano line with her own voice. Quiet, untrained, but true, and the violin part, transcribed for the piano's upper register. The sound carried. Through the open stage door, into the alley. Through the walls, into the foyer. People who had come for the cancelled performance, and found closed doors, stopped, listened, followed the sound inside. They entered through the stage door, through the wings, and stood in the half-dark auditorium. Not invited guests in a Duke's music room. The opera's own public, drawn by sound, standing in the dark, because they had followed the music. Elise did not stop playing. She did not look up. She played through the first movement, the second, the resolution she had written at 2 in the morning, when the melody in her father's notebook had been unbearable to leave unfinished. The stage door opened again. Julian walked into the auditorium. He saw her, saw the piano, saw the people standing in the dark. He did not speak, did not introduce her, did not validate her. He sat down in the third row and listened. When she finished, the quiet was absolute. Then Ferry, still in the orchestra pit, coat half on, spoke. I have known for 3 years, he said. His voice carried through the auditorium. I knew Samuel Harmon was dead. I knew the compositions submitted under his name were written by his daughter. I said nothing because the company would not accept her work under her own name. I permitted the fiction because I wanted the music. That cowardice was mine. He looked at Elise. The music you heard tonight was composed by Miss Elise Harmon, not her father. Her. It was not validation. It was accountability. The people standing in the dark heard. The stagehands heard. Julian heard. Elise sat at the piano, her hands flat on the keys, shaking. The auditorium emptied slowly. The stagehands returned to their work. Ferry left through the orchestra pit entrance. His coat finally pulled on, his face gray. Julian crossed the stage. Elise did not look up. He reached into his coat and withdrew the glove, set it on the piano, lid beside her hands. I believe this is yours, he said. She looked at it. You searched London for this. I searched for the woman who wore it. I found someone more important. Who? The woman who finished my brother's music, and who just played it for an empty theater. Because she decided the music mattered more than who was listening. Elise picked up the glove, turned it over in her hands. Your brother left money for my father's work, she said. The work is mine now. I know. The trust has been executed. The papers were filed this morning. She looked up sharply. This morning. Yes. Before the performance was cancelled. Yes. You acted before you knew what your aunt had done. I acted because it was the right thing to do, not because it would save you. Elise set the glove down, stood, took his hand, ink-stained fingers around his wrist, and pulled him down onto the piano bench beside her. The stage was dark. The auditorium was empty. The piano held them both. Your brother would have liked you more if you'd come on Thursday, she said. I know. He would have liked you now. That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in 18 months. It is not kindness. It is a musical observation. Nathaniel's compositions were about people who arrive late, but arrive. You are very late. I am here. Yes, you are. She gripped his coat at the lapel with one ink-stained hand and pulled him toward her. The kiss was fierce, weeks of restraint. The cancelled performance, the trust, the music, all of it breaking on a piano bench that held them both. She initiated from below, seated. He bent toward her, his hands coming up to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. The stage that had been dark an hour ago held them. The auditorium that had almost silenced her held them. When they finally pulled apart, Elisa's hands were still gripping his coat. Your family will be furious, she said. My family mourned, a version of Nate they invented. I would rather honor the one who existed. Your grandmother will never forgive you. My grandmother will survive. My brother did not, and the least I can do for a man I never bothered to visit is make sure his last wish reaches the person he intended it for. Elise released his coat, smoothed the fabric where her hands had creased it. The trust gives me independence, she said, but it does not give me a stage. The opera company will not accept my work now. Then we will find another stage. There is no other stage. Then we will build one. She looked at him. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. You played in an empty theater tonight because the music demanded it. That is worth more than any program listing. Elise stood, walked to the edge of the stage, looked out at the dark auditorium. I do not need you to build me a stage, she said. I need you to stand beside me while I build it myself. Julian rose from the piano bench, crossed the stage, stood beside her. Then that is what I will do, he said. 3 months later, Covent Garden, evening. The program read, Duet for Violin and Soprano, composed by Nathaniel Grayborn and Elise Harmon. Both names. In print, Elise stood in the foyer, the same marble, the same candlelight, wearing a new dress and her mother's gloves. Julian stood beside her in his dark coat, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. She removed one glove, deliberately, placed it on the balustrade where the first one had fallen. Julian looked down at it. What are you doing? The last time I left a glove here, you spent 3 weeks searching London. I want to see what happens when I leave one on purpose. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands. Kid leather, ink on the seam. The same man picks it up, he said, and this time he does not need to search. He already knows whose hand it fits. He slid the glove onto her hand, finger by finger, in the foyer, before the crowd, the most public, most intimate gesture of the evening. They returned to the box, not box 12, but a smaller one Julian had purchased for the season. The duet began, violin and soprano. Nathaniel's unfinished melody resolved by Elisa's hand, performed now under both their names. Elise listened to her own music under her own name. Julian sat beside her, his hand covering hers on the armrest, and listened to his brother's voice alive in the auditorium. When the duet ended, the applause was thunderous. Elise did not stand. She sat with her hand in Julian's and let the sound wash over her. After the performance, they walked out through the front entrance. Not the stage door, the front. On the street, Julian fell into step beside her. The director will want another piece, he said. I know. Will you give him one? Yes, but this time the score will carry my name. Not my father's. Not Nathaniel's. Mine, he will argue. He argued last time, the time before that. He will argue again. And I will leave the score on his desk and walk out. The music does not need his permission. It needs paper and ink, and someone who can hear where it wants to go. They walked. Morning light on the London street. Not toward an estate, not toward a printer's shop, but forward, wherever the next composition took her. He walked beside her because he had chosen to be there. Not as a duke, as a man who had learned very late that arriving mattered more than arriving on time. The opera house was behind them. The glove was in her pocket. The front door was always open now. Months later, morning, Covent Garden. Elise walked through the front entrance, carrying a leather folder. The cover page read, Sonata for Violin and Piano, Elise Harman. Her name, no initials, no dead man's. She left the folder with the director's secretary. Did not wait for acknowledgement. Walked back out. On the street, Julian fell into step beside her. He carried nothing, no title, no glove, no instrument. Just himself, in a plain coat, matching her pace. The director will want revisions, he said. The director always wants revisions. Will you make them? Only the ones that serve the music. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Elise stopped, turned to face him. Your grandmother still will not speak to you. No, your aunt crosses the street when she sees you. Yes, society whispers when we enter a room. They do. And you are content with this. Julian took her hand. Ink-stained fingers. The glove in her pocket. The score delivered. The front door always open. I am content, he said, with the woman who played in an empty theater, because the music demanded it. The rest is noise. Elise smiled, then let them whisper. They walked. Morning light on the London street. The opera house behind them. The music ahead, and in her pocket, folded carefully, the glove that had started everything, no longer lost, no longer anonymous, but chosen, named, and hers.